You know that sudden, quiet impulse that tells you to move in a specific direction. It isn't a loud thought, it's a subtle pull. But then, something happens. You pause. You wait for more evidence. You look for a reason to justify the feeling. Most of us call this being careful. We think we are being logical. But in that moment of hesitation, a strange shift occurs. The clarity vanishes. The excitement turns into heavy friction. Have you ever noticed how the more you try to verify your intuition, the further away it seems to drift? It raises an unsettling question about how we actually function. We've been taught that trust is something you build over time, but there is a hidden mechanism that suggests we've been looking at the process entirely backward. We have all experienced those days where every door seems to open before we even reach it. Conversations feel effortless, and opportunities appear exactly when they are needed. But then, the atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, we find ourselves stuck in a cycle of hesitation. We analyze every move, yet the more we think, the heavier the resistance becomes. This pattern appears more often than we realize. It is easy to assume these moments of friction are just bad luck or external obstacles. But something unusual happens in moments like these. We may have overlooked a subtle signal that was present from the beginning. It is possible that we are misinterpreting the very nature of self-trust.
Why do some moments feel entirely effortless, while others feel fundamentally blocked? This suggests that these shifts aren't random. They might be following a hidden principle that operates beneath the surface of our awareness. Watch closely, because the mechanism behind this is far simpler than most people imagine. Have you noticed how certain periods of your life unfold with almost uncanny precision? You think of a person, and they call. You encounter a problem, and the solution appears in a casual conversation the next day. In these moments, life feels like a river moving with a steady, supportive current. But then the cycle shifts. You find yourself pushing against an invisible wall. Projects stall. Communication breaks down. Even the simplest tasks begin to require immense effort. Most people misinterpret this pattern as a string of good days or a streak of bad luck. We often dismiss these shifts as external accidents beyond our control. But this is where the pattern becomes clear. The repetition suggests something much deeper than mere coincidence. These shifts between flow and resistance aren't random events happening to you. They appear to be consistent responses to something occurring within you. Have you ever noticed how quickly the flow can disappear the moment you start to doubt the direction you're taking? This strange consistency is difficult to ignore.
It suggests that our reality is not a fixed landscape, but a system that reacts to a very specific internal signal. This is where the experience begins to make sense. We often think of self-trust as a moral virtue or a personality trait that we must struggle to develop. But this reveals something important about how reality actually works. The shifts between flow and friction aren't random obstacles. They are precise indicators of your alignment. The core of this teaching is that your excitement is not just an emotion, it is a highly sophisticated navigation system. It is a biological and vibrational frequency that tells you exactly which direction is most aligned with your true self in any given moment. When you hesitate or doubt, you aren't just being cautious, you are effectively disconnecting from the very signal meant to guide you. This explains why the flow vanishes the moment you stop trusting the impulse. It is simpler than most people expect. We often overlook this signal because it feels too ordinary or too quiet to be reliable. But the pattern is consistent. When you follow the impulse without the need for external proof, the resistance disappears. Suddenly, the pattern becomes easier to understand. You aren't building trust, You are learning to read a signal that has been present all along. This is the hidden rule behind the experience. To understand why trust feels so difficult, you have to look at how reality actually structures itself.
Think of your consciousness as a radio receiver. Every choice you make and every belief you hold is essentially a way of tuning into a specific frequency. When you follow your excitement, you are tuning into a version of reality where the path is already clear. But when you hesitate or doubt, you aren't just thinking, you are literally switching the channel. Suddenly, you are viewing a different set of possibilities, ones defined by the very friction you fear. This explains why the pattern behaves this way. The flow doesn't disappear because you were wrong, but because you changed the frequency of your observation. Imagine a film reel where every frame is a slightly different version of your life. When you act on your impulse, you move seamlessly between frames of alignment. When you stop to analyze and doubt, you effectively freeze the motion. You begin to experience the static between the frames. This mechanism has been operating in your life the entire time, even in your most mundane decisions. Why does the flow vanish the moment we ignore the signal? Because the signal was the bridge to that specific reality. Once you let go of the signal, you let go of the bridge. Suddenly, the shift begins to make sense. You are not a victim of a random world. You are an active participant in a system that simply mirrors back the level of certainty you project. The idea of following excitement sounds remarkably simple. It seems like a clear, direct path to alignment.
But if the mechanism is so logical, why do we find it so difficult to actually use? This is where many of us lose the signal. The difficulty doesn't come from a lack of ability, but from an internal dialogue designed to keep us safe. The moment a quiet impulse of excitement appears, a louder voice usually follows. It speaks the language of practicality and caution. It tells us that our intuition is irresponsible, or that we need more evidence before we move. This is the moment the inner voice begins to argue, and suddenly the excitement is replaced by heavy doubt. Most people make the mistake of confusing this caution with wisdom. We interpret our fear as logic and our resistance as maturity. We convince ourselves that ignoring the signal is the responsible thing to do. But when we silence the signal in favor of being realistic, we effectively disconnect from the frequency of flow. We choose the comfort of the familiar over the expansion of the possible. How many times has caution silenced the signal of excitement in your life? If you've felt this internal tug-of-war before, I'm curious to hear how you experienced it in the comments below. Despite the weight of our internal resistance, the method for returning to alignment is surprisingly subtle. It doesn't require dramatic life changes or immense willpower. Instead, it involves a simple shift in how you navigate your immediate options. The formula is a continuous loop of 3 basic steps.
First, look at the choices available to you right now, and notice which one carries even the slightest edge of more excitement or curiosity than the others. Second, act on that specific excitement to the best of your ability, taking it as far as you can until you can take it no further. Third, and most importantly, do this with absolutely zero attachment to a specific outcome. This is where the navigation begins. By choosing the path of excitement, you are effectively staying tuned to the frequency of flow we discussed earlier. This process works best when followed with curiosity rather than pressure. It isn't about forcing a result, it's about exploring a signal. How different would a day feel if you followed the signal instead of the fear? When you act on these small, everyday curiosities, you are signaling to the mechanism that you are ready for the next level of alignment.
If this perspective resonates with you, consider subscribing for more explorations like this, and leave a like if this idea is helping you see your choices in a new light. The shift rarely starts with something dramatic. It usually appears as a quiet, unassuming curiosity in the middle of a mundane afternoon. Imagine you're working on a task when you suddenly feel a small impulse to reach out to an old colleague or look into a topic that seems entirely unrelated to your current goal. Usually, we dismiss these moments as distractions, but this is often how the shift begins. You decide to send that short message anyway. An hour later, they reply with a piece of information that perfectly solves a problem you've been struggling with for weeks. Or perhaps you choose to take a different route home because the idea felt interesting and you happen to see a sign for a workshop or event you've been looking for. These aren't just lucky accidents. They are the visible results of the mechanism in motion. Have you ever followed a small curiosity that led somewhere unexpected? You may have already experienced similar moments without realizing their significance, dismissing them as simple coincidences. But when you look closely, you see the pattern. A small decision shifts the direction of your day because you stayed tuned to the signal. The momentum builds not through massive effort, but through a sequence of these tiny, aligned moments. This suggests something remarkable about the nature of reality. We have spent our lives viewing the world as a solid, fixed landscape that we must navigate with effort and caution. But the pattern reveals a deeper meaning. It suggests that reality is not a rigid structure, but a fluid mirror that responds to the frequency of your internal alignment. When you follow your excitement, you aren't just making a better choice, you are selecting a different version of the world. This changes the way we understand the experience of self-trust entirely.
It implies that every potential version of your life already exists as a possibility, and your signal of excitement is the only compass that knows the way to the one you prefer. Self-trust is not a psychological skill. It is the act of allowing yourself to be guided by the part of your consciousness that already exists in that higher alignment. You may already be standing at the threshold of this realization in your own life. Could these small signals be guiding us toward versions of ourselves we have not yet explored? This revelation reframes every impulse of curiosity as a direct bridge to a parallel state of being. Perhaps the signal has been there all along, waiting beneath the noise of second-guessing and the search for external proof. We often wait for a grand sign to tell us it is safe to move, yet the pattern suggests that the sign is the movement itself. Sometimes the shift begins simply by noticing. As you move through your day, you may begin to see these patterns appearing in moments you previously dismissed as luck or timing. You might notice how a small impulse, when followed, carries a lightness that logic cannot explain. How many of these quiet signals have appeared in your life, only to be silenced by the need for certainty? The journey toward self-trust is not a destination you reach, but a frequency you choose to inhabit.
If you are curious about the deeper mechanics behind this signal, the exploration on screen dives into the specific ways these frequencies shape the reality you see. It is the next step in understanding how your internal state becomes your external world.